Greetings. Delighted to be with you, Chavarim. We are on to our next Heartfelt Haftarah. We've just concluded the riotous holiday of Purim. I hope some of you caught our wonderful Purim spiel. In the process of all that, I found my tent peg, so I'm excited. Anyway, so our Torah portion for this week is Ki Tisa, which interrupts the narrative of the construction of the portable sanctuary, the Mishkan, with the terrible story of the golden calf incident, but then moves on to talk about a divine revelation that Moses is given. So there's the sour and the sweet in this week's Torah portion, and the Haftarah portion is selected to go with it, and it's a particularly interesting one. Now, I will note this is Shabbat Parah, which is a specially designated Shabbat. I've been tending to ignore them, so I'm going to acknowledge in advance that that's what's happening. Now, with Shabbat Parah, there is a special reading assigned, which is Ezekiel. But we've done a bit of Ezekiel now for here, and it's not a terribly compelling one for our purposes. So I'd like to use the one that is normally assigned to Ki Tisa, and that is the narrative from the Book of Kings, in which we hear about the great confrontation between Ahab, the king of the northern kingdom, Elijah, and the priests of Baal and the priests of Asherah. So it's just too fabulous to let go by. So that's what we're going to be talking about. But before we get to that, let's do some tent peg discussion. And in this place, I'm going to zero in on the person and the legend, the man and the myth of Elijah. There is perhaps no more figure beloved in from the biblical tradition in later Judaism than the prophet Elijah. Yeah, we love Moses, but he's a bit of a remote figure. We admire the scoundrel David and appreciate him for what he did to create the Israelite kingdom. But neither one of them enjoy the kind of folkloric magic that is associated with Elijah. So Elijah, first of all, begins in a rather interesting way as a mystery character. So he's it's the 9th century BCE in the northern kingdom. He seems to be from the territory east of the Jordan River. If you go back into the Torah, you will learn that two tribes settled, Gad and Reuben, settled on the east side of the Jordan River, and he's from that area. And apparently, without any real clear explanation of his prophetic call, he becomes deeply concerned with the fact that the cult of Baal has penetrated deeply into the northern kingdom, and he is out to oppose that, and he's going to stand up to anyone who gets in his way: generals, armies, kings. He becomes, first of all, the archetypal dissident gadfly that Jews so love. But then something else mysterious happens to him, something that doesn't happen to any other prophet, and that is that we are told in a very dramatic narrative that he doesn't die in the conventional sense. He is carried up into the celestial realms by a chariot. He doesn't die. So not only does that add to the mystery of the character, but it just makes him stand out. Now, there's maybe one other biblical character where something similar happens, and that's Enoch in the book of Genesis, but nothing as elaborate as what is credited in the story to Elijah occurs to Enoch. He just is there, and then suddenly he isn't there. Elijah, we get the whole swept up into the sky story, and as a result, it becomes widely accepted that Elijah is not dead. And then that is cemented further at the very end of the Bible when the prophet Malachi, the last of the prophets who has returned from exile, says that when the kingship, the dynasty of King David is restored, that will be heralded by the return of Elijah. And this sets it all up for what we now know as the great tradition of visitations of Elijah. Now, in terms of our liturgy, we have at least 3 points of contact with Elijah. At a Havdalah ceremony at the end of Shabbat, we sing the song Eliyahu Hanavi, in which we talk about how Elijah will show up with the Messiah, and that is our hope. Maybe it will be this week. We keep singing that song. It remains a constant because watching for the Messiah is one of the most secure jobs in the world, right? We just keep waiting year after year, thousands of years. That's one. The second famous one is that we set out a seat for Elijah and we welcome him to every circumcision. Now, this seems to be driven by the fact that Elijah himself, at times during his prophetic career, doubts the loyalty of the people Israel to the covenant. And so maybe it's to demonstrate, maybe it's a punishment for Elijah that he is required to go and sit in on each and every bris that happens so that he knows that the Jewish people remain loyal to the covenant despite his doubting words. So this is not a case in Christian tradition of a doubting Thomas. This may be a case of a doubting Elijah. And we just want to make it totally clear, and God wants to make it totally clear that we continue to be devoted. Now, the final element that we're most familiar with is, of course, at the very end of the Passover Seder. Again, magnifying sort of the Havdalah idea, it is our hope that this year will be the last year that we hope for the advent of the Messianic era, the end of oppression, the end of suffering, and that human life will be perfected on earth. And so famously, at the very end, we open up the door of our house or our synagogue at the community Seder and look to see if Elijah has arrived this year, so that this year will be the year of the advent of the Messiah. Again, it's incredible job security waiting for the Messiah to show up. But this reiterates this idea that Elijah is alive and kicking, and he's out there just waiting for a grand return. Now, probably less familiar to you is the great Talmudic and later folkloric tradition of the visitation of Elijah. Elijah is a prophet. Prophets provide the highest level of revelation. Not quite as high as Moses, the greatest of all prophets, but very high level. But the institution of prophecy is gone. We don't recognize prophets anymore. The Talmud tells us we shouldn't recognize prophets anymore. But there are occasional moments when little revelations, not prophetic level revelations, but little messages from heaven will come to us. One form of this is what is known as the bat kol, or the heavenly echo in which a voice from heaven speaks to us. Oftentimes it's something clarifying, or it tells us uh, who's right and who's wrong in an argument or something like that. It's nice to have that happen in the rare occasion when it does. But the other more famous one, the one that has literally hundreds of stories associated with, is the visitation of Elijah. And according to this tradition, Elijah just appears suddenly, unexpectedly, like the Spanish Inquisition, and unrecognized. And in the course of his appearance, he will either do something for someone who desperately needs an intervention, he will prevent something from happening, or he will convey a message from behind the veil of heaven. And so this minor form of revelation gets told over and over again. There's a number of fabulous examples of it within the Talmud itself, but more often than not, it has been extrapolated and magnified in Jewish folklore in the Middle Ages and in early Jewish tradition, and there's even some modern traditions. And it becomes a custom to sort of watch every once in a while and see if something is happening that where there's enough synergy to it that you might say that Elijah was there. I actually have two stories of encountering Elijah in my own lifetime, neither of which I'm going to share with you today, maybe on another occasion. Keep you coming back. But in any case, so that's Elijah in all of his importance. So let's get to the actual Haftarah itself. So what's going on? Well, just as Moses ends up confronting the people about the construction of the Egel Zahav, the golden calf or the golden bull that appears in our Torah portion, what happens in this episode from the first book of Kings, chapter 18, is that Elijah, who has disappeared during a drought, is encountered, and he asks the king, he goes to the king of Israel, and he asks the king that he should have a proof of faith, a moment of demonstration in which he confronts the many priests of Baal and the many priests of Asherah who are currently under the king's employment. So they have infiltrated and entered into the very highest levels of the Israelite government, and Elijah needs to reverse this trend. So he says, let's have a public demonstration. So on Mount Carmel, Elijah, all by himself, is confronted by 950 priests and prophets of these pagan deities. And the demonstration is very Spielbergian. It's just the sort of thing you want to see in a cinematic moment. He commands them to slaughter a sacrifice, lay out all the wood, everything you would normally do to do a sacrifice. And he says, but you don't get to add any fire. You have to ask your gods to ignite this offering. And so in a very protracted scene, the priests and prophets of Baal and Asherah, they dance and they chant and they cry out and they go to extremis. They're slashing themselves across the chest with spear points and knives in order to get the attention of the gods to light this offering. And not surprisingly, nothing happens. So then Elijah turns to the crowd who has gathered, hundreds of Israelites to watch this. And he says, now watch me, but first I want you to pour some water on the offering. So, and he says, do it again. And he says, do it again. So you can see how contrived this moment is. And then without any of the mishigas, without any of the theatrics or any of the things that the priests and the prophets of the pagan deities attempt, he simply says, if the God of Israel is the God like this. And sure enough, a flame strike comes from heaven itself, hits the offering that Elijah has laid out in competition with his opponents, and consumes it entirely. It's basically all sucked up into heaven. Maybe you might think of this, maybe there's a parallel scene in Close Encounters of the Third Kind or something like that. But in any case, it's big. Oh no, actually, Raiders of the Lost Ark, when the Ark of the Covenant comes, and there's a swirling column over there and it burns all the Nazis and then closes up the Ark. It's like that. It's like that. And as soon as people witness this remarkable, admittedly miraculous, not your normal kind of proof of a religious idea, they all shout, "Truly, Adonai is God." And then Elijah, having anticipated this moment, simply instructs them all, kill all these priests and all these prophets of Baal, and let's restore monotheism to the northern kingdom. And the mob immediately does this. This is the Iron Age. This is pretty much the way religions fought each other forever. So, and he is a warrior. He's a ruthless warrior prophet. And then Ahab, seeing quite clearly which way the wind is blowing, suddenly declares himself a loyal follower of the God of Israel. And Elijah escorts him back to his palace by running in front of his chariot. And at least temporarily, the true faith has been restored to the Israelite people. It's so wild. It's right up there with all the miracle stories we see appearing in the Torah. And you should be aware that this first and second book of Kings has a huge concentration of prophets doing miracles, very much in the same vein as Moses. Now, most prophets in the Bible are not primarily known for their miracle working. They're known for their messages and their rhetoric, but in this particular case, this is pretty awesome. And I have to say, it's great. When you read it, you're really swept up in the story. We don't get moments like that anymore. And maybe it's because, at the end of the day, miracles don't sustain our confidence for very long. We end up questioning what we saw, what happened, was it manipulated in some way, et cetera, et cetera. So as a rule, Judaism does not rely on miracles anymore in the same way we don't rely on prophets anymore. Elijah has been reduced to a messenger and a do-good character, basically the Jewish equivalent of Jack Reacher, who just sort of drifts into a town, rights some wrong, fixes something, and then disappears into the wilderness again. He's the Jewish Lone Ranger. And that's how we think of him. And we no longer think of him as the crusading prophet who will order the death of hundreds in order to establish the purity of Israelite religion. He's the nice old man who helps you change your flat tire. So that's our Haftarah for this week, and I look forward to sharing with you what we have for next week.